To start? Oh no, just a minute. Yeah. Trying to be lovely. Just a minute.
Yeah. It's in the price of cheese.
Oh, welcome everybody. Welcome back, Stu. Good to have you here.
It's nice to be here.
Yeah.
Nice.
Glory there. Nice feedback, which Wayne's just going to deal with.
Good.
Marvellous. Thank you. And we are back again to talk about rates reviews. Have we had our new evaluations when you were here last time?
Yes, we had.
Yeah, so. Way.
Right, I'm just waiting. Yeah, it's just coming up at the end of the presentation. So yes, this is workshop 3.
Yep.
I think. This is kind of it's almost rubber hitting the road time. So we need some direction on where you want us to go and start doing all the work. We have modelled some scenarios that may seem random, but we'll talk about those as we come through to them. We have put, as you can see, the new wallpaper decorating the council chambers here. So the new values in status quo, so they incorporate of the QV changes with the based on the current rating situation, what we currently do. So that's that one, and then we'll talk about the solution or the scenarios as we go through. We've produced a lot of heat maps for both the district and individual towns, so you can have a bit of a look at the impact of each of the scenarios on properties. So yeah, we look forward to an engaging time today as we go through this, and as I say, hopefully at the end of it we've got a little bit of direction that we can start producing documentation for your decision making. So I'll hand over to Stephen, who's going to take us through. A lot of it you've seen through, skip through it because there's a lot of the information has been talked about before, but I guess you really want to get to rates and what that's going to, how that's going to impact people. So I'll hand over to Stephen.
So there's the agenda for today. It's a pretty simple agenda. We're going to be talking about rates modelling most of the time here. An outcome for today.
You got to tell.
Purpose for today is to what is our preferred capital value rating option. To the statement of proposal, the status quo is always an option. We have a preferred option. There may be other options that we considered and could be appropriate, and there may be some options that we consider not to be appropriate. Those things will go into the statement of proposal. So, but to get there, we need to make decisions, well, not decisions, but direction, so that we can make decisions when time comes. Slide. It's just a reminder, really important part of the Local Government Act, that it is council that determines what is appropriate. I'll keep coming back on that. Slides that I'm not going to go through on what we have done. You're all there. Move through to rates modelling. Next slide.
Yeah, yeah, we go.
Yep. So we're ticking the box off for the changes, the revaluation, and the next big thing will be the annual plan resolution. Right. So modelling, we got there very quickly. Status quo for today and for all the work that we've done recently is annual plan 26-27, which has a 8.4% increase, and with what has gone, there would be the 6.9 UAGC.
Just that 8.44 is pre-growth. So don't get worried about that. We allow for 2.1% growth, so the average is 6.3. Yeah. Just, thank you. Didn't want to get worried about that.
Yeah, so that's the status quo, and the maps that we've got include the refuse and the small amounts of money that go.
But
Grants. Thank you. So,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's all there now. So the scenarios. Honestly, I've done some fantastic work here. And so we've got 4 scenarios here. They all start the same with the UAGC, gas management, community build grants. And there's some differences there that are highlighted in yellow. So scenario 1, and you've got a single page because we're probably going to keep going backwards and forwards to remind yourself which one's which. One of each goes over there. So scenario 1, 100% general rate except for the wastewater and so that's the dams continuing to receive their current rating, the same as the rest of the community, which is the 8.4. And that's with the change to CV. Scenario 2 is we remove the dam's separate rate and the differential, and put everything into general rate. Scenario 3 is it has a factor, so it creates a differential that is a factor of 0.8 and everyone else has a factor of 1. If you have a look on here, is the table, and that table shows in the purple column, in fact, if you go to the next screen, on the screen as well, the purple column, 2 purples here, the dark column, it's a 0.8, paying exactly the same for the property value under capital value. Yeah. And then scenario 4 is got a different set of differentials for commercial, industrial, utilities, area mining, with a factor of 2. So we'll look at those scenarios and see how they different.
They're the effects of each of the scenarios modelled on in a heat map.
Good. Yep. So these tweaking these differentials is an easy thing to do. Hundreds of them because they take a long time. But if we were looking at you know, if you've got 0.8, you could move it one way or the other. If that's the scenario, it would be better. Right, go to the next slide. So this is everything on here. And what I want to point out on this slide is the annual plan 26-27. It's this great big purple line going out there. And if we didn't do a rates review, if the outcome of the rates review was to stay with the existing scenario, then most people, roughly 1,200 of 1,500 ratepayers, would be getting an increase in their rates of between $0 and $250. That's what that line represents. What we're doing is we're redistributing the rates by going to capital value. And so we're starting, so we get a spread. There's going to be winners and losers from that. So that should be no surprise. The higher your capital value is, then you're going to pay more. And there's a large number of people, as you can see in that, that are under the $0 through to minus 1,000 or thereabouts. Those people are going to pay less than what they're paying today. So we'll look into these a bit more detail. Okay. Making sense so far? So this is from the previous page, and I'll just cut it down to that band of 1,000 to minus 1,000. And so in the status quo, there's that orange bit there, and that's where most of the people, most properties are going to pay that extra, and that extra comes from that 8%. With all of our scenarios, you've got a large number of properties. So going to capital value and introducing utilities, get this decrease in rates from what people are paying now over each of those scenarios. But no, stay there.
Oh, sorry.
Why do those totals at the bottom go down?
Yeah. The percentages?
Nah, the 14,500 now down to 11,100, etc.
And
Yeah,
that row there. So that's the number of rating units that are in each bracket. So 95% of
there's some outside the 1,000.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So what I want to do today is look at the majority. And the majority are in this space. It's a long list of outliers. This is where, we start off with 14,500 of 15,000 and a bit ratepayers are all in that set of data that we're seeing. And then as you go down the scenarios, less and less are going to be in that space. But some of those people are going to be getting, they're going to pay less. You can see there that it's, as you go across on that bottom line, the number gets bigger, people that are paying less. Sense? We'll move on.
And I guess conversely, sorry, the ones above that line, you can see where they're paying more. They are it's getting less and less who are paying more as you go across the scenario. So you'd expect to see that if you extrapolate it outside of those ranges, wouldn't you?
Yeah. I think we've got a good mix across the ranges. Hopefully somewhere in there is a preferred option. All right, next slide. So I've got a whole lot of slides like this. So we have consistently used the same colours, hopefully, for the different scenarios. On the left-hand side is the dollars that they are paying. So we're in the 2,500 to 3,000 mark for these residential properties and lifestyle properties. That's an average rate. So you'll recall that we looked at the $620,000 properties, residential properties at our last meeting. And so the four scenarios, we start with the dark green one, I guess. That's scenario 1. And so that's the scenario where we just go to CV, but keep the dams differential the same. Then we go and put the dams into a different into the general rate with no differential. And that's the blue one. And then scenario 4 is we reduce the rates for residential properties by a factor of 8.
Scenario 3.
Scenario 3. Is that what I said?
No, yeah, it's all right.
Oh, sorry. And then the light green is scenario 4, and that's commercial, industrial, utilities, dairy, and mining, which we spent a lot of time talking about this group, having a factor of 2. And that's the impact that it has on residential and lifestyle properties. In every scenario, our residents, our residential properties, for a wee tweak on that lifestyle one in the dark green, they're all paying less in these scenarios. So that takes us to commercial and industrial. See on the left-hand side, size of the numbers more, going from 5,000 up to 25,000 in terms of the rates they pay. And the smaller industries are paying less. And then as you get to the large hotel, when you get into scenario 4, it's a big lift into the other options. That's the commercial element going to a factor of 2. Right, the next one we go to orchards, farm, vineyards, and dairy. Big decreases. No UAGC. Oh, sorry, there is a UAGC in here. Sorry, no, getting mixed up. So the capital value is of great benefit to farming, big farmers especially, because it's all land value, rather capital value that's been added. Yeah. Carry on.
Just
Yep.
one thing, dairy, dairy is because the exact opposite. Their initial value was in land value, but they've got a lot of capital value tied up in that operation. So that is why you see them spike up in the ×2. All the other farms, as Stephen has said, have most of their value is in the land value anyway, and it's minor capital value on top of that.
Forestry and mining. And then this is where the big change, hello.
Why is there not a differential applied to forestry? Because we're only capturing the land value, you can't capture the trees, correct?
A tiny amount.
Only a very small few properties that would be forestry, but it's a good question. We just didn't do it.
I thought
Now we talked about a number of things.
Yeah.
We're focusing on the big lots.
Yeah.
For now.
Yeah.
We want to tweak that, then we can.
No, it's just a
And
question.
you can see the impacts of it.
I guess it's just whether including forestry becomes a disincentive to investing in forests. And if that's what we're trying to drive at, damage on roads, so on and so on, and keep the land for its primary purpose.
Well, a way I look at it as a differential on forestry would go some way to paying for the
That's right.
wilding pine issue that we're going to have to encounter, and well, it's already an issue now.
Would it be on commercial forestry?
Yeah.
As opposed to, I guess, would you know, we're asking other commercial entities
Yeah,
to pay.
yeah,
A factor of
forestry,
2,
yeah,
and if you planted trees as your commercial venture,
yeah. And we've got to remember the capital value of the forestry block doesn't capture the value of the trees because they're chalets. So they're actually,
Make it a factor of 6.
it just seems that are
Well,
not.
I mean, if it's an incentive, well, if it's an incentive that, you know, down the road, you're going to have the same issues you're talking about Wilding Pine, and we contribute.
Yeah.
And you're coming here to possibly use carbon farm as an example, where Wilding Pine is a direct disadvantage of this, then that decision and so, well, I might be better off being coastal Otago, it's close to working forestry. But it's just, that's the rating implication of positive or negative.
Yep.
Just us turning the dial.
Easy to do.
keep that in the mix.
Yep.
Thank you.
Let's be careful we don't capture people who are putting in land conservation, putting in forestry. Scenario rather than farming it. So I think a commercial.
Yeah, and that's it. We just have to find out where it fits. But if you're all of a sudden you're like Kiki or whatever name come over from Scandinavia and take out whole chunks of land and all of a sudden turn it to carbon farming, the direct result of Wilding Pine issues it is probably.
Get that, but don't want to catch you for
No,
conservation reasons, putting some area into trees because it's better for the soil.
Forestry over a certain amount of hectares.
yeah.
You're right. Individual properties, there's not a lot in Central Otago.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean they shouldn't get a free ride. Not a free ride.
Good, that's what we're here for. Utilities, the big shift. So these are all going up because their capital value is far greater than the land value. You'll see that they all had a little bit of land value. Scenario status quo in 2025-26 rates. But the moment we go to capital value, they all spike up. And, you know, reasonably big numbers there. Certainly big numbers compared to residential properties, for example. So we've got our own civic water supplies. Still a little bit of communications technology out there, and underground for chorus there, and then some energy companies there. This is the big change.
The split between those two different energy ones at the end there.
Probably be just a different line. So talking about any specific utility, one will be like the power lines, the transpower ones, and then one will be the internal residential ones. I think it'll just depend on that.
Will they be the ones that aren't? So they're like the other dams as well, might be Parallel, Teviot Valley types of thing.
And the ratio of 2 is actually, in the scheme of things, when you canvass what other cities are doing in their business differential, you know, some are as high as 3.7, and quite high. So 2 is not unreasonable.
You've got to be really careful with these differentials because the factor is very different compared to because it all depends on the size of your whole database. You know, I did some work for Waira, I talked about that, and I've done some work for Gisborne, dealing with the same tree stuff, and the differential factors were vastly different because of the size of their total pie, but effectively giving same amount of to the industry. So be a bit careful comparing yourself with others based on that.
So some of these entities, these utilities, will have a direct relationship if they pass that cost on back to the ratepayer anyway. So you're really only robbing Peter to pay Paul. If your water entity's rate goes up from where it might sit now to a way higher, it still comes back to the ratepayer indirectly, doesn't it?
In terms of the water entity, yeah, absolutely.
How that
Generators, for argument's sake, that will be a different pricing model that they will spread across
whole region.
however they do it. They've got a far larger customer base.
I don't know what the medium term view is for your water company, But if it was looking to have equalisation eventually, at the moment, your other partners have already done this, and I was part of putting it in at Waitaki many years ago. So the water cost of rating water at capital value has always been part of the water rate going to farmers and things like that.
And then I guess you'd ask the question that we asked last time and the time before, what makes them any different? Because if you answer that question and the answer is they're not, then you apply the same rules. But if you say they are, then you've got to apply that they are to all the other the activities that we will rate. What makes them any different?
Right, utilities. So we've got next on utilities is irrigation. Much smaller numbers here. We've got 3 different values on the bottom. See the difference in the change there as your capital value goes up.
Has anyone looked at, it's coming straight out of my mind, but utility types and different differentials, given that some utilities are going to have very high cost tech within them, which is this, they're a bit more rudimentary, because that's going to really drive, from a valuation point of view. You think about what's in the waste. I'm just thinking about the civic waste, civic water, and what's been enforced to have to go into there now. Compare that to a lines company that's got a few poles and some lines strung around the place.
Does the capital value represent that?
Well, to me, I guess the investment that it takes to set up some of those versus others is going to be quite a bit different. So there would be a capital value.
Yeah. High capital value, yeah. So agree with that. So you're thinking they should get a discount?
No, yeah. Just thinking if they're getting the same differential applied, is it not going to stack, especially for that civic stuff, going to stack their rates higher compared to
within region or
within the same utility pool that's got the same differential on it.
You mean different types of utilities having the same differential?
Yeah. Has anyone thought about, has anyone looked it up, I guess, explored or done it, different differentials within a grouping?
We see it.
Different one for solar versus dams versus wind.
When I was more thinking about that discussion before about water entity is going to get its price go up and then it's just going to come back on and run anyway.
Going to come back on water users, not everyone.
Yeah, water users, sorry, yeah.
Whereas at the moment, there'll be people not getting water that are paying water rates here. That'd be right. Per connection.
So it's on a
per connection. Okay.
Yeah.
I think there's some historic ones, and that dams have, thanks to the court case in Hensley, under old legislation, dams have always had a differential from the rest.
So irrigation here will be agricultural irrigation, just utility irrigation, like council.
Cultural ones.
Yeah. They're picked up separately other than agriculture as well.
Yeah, they are. They're in terms of the titles that we're using, they're QV distinctions. So that's why we've just kind of said utilities. So it does differ from, so the irrigation differs from the farm.
Talking about the race infrastructure.
Yeah. Because highest and best use is how QV value it.
What's the difference between utility of 250K to 290 to 1.2 million? It's all relative to value, isn't it?
That's just values, yeah, but that's not valued as part of the farm, if it's running across the farm.
It's normally not a separate parcel of land, it's an easement, it's historic easements.
Yeah, so
So the rate's tied up with the landowner anyway, isn't it?
no, so the irrigation is owned by an irrigation company. They
Yeah.
have an easement over the land, and most utilities have an easement over the land. They don't necessarily own the land.
So most irrigations are still paying separate
Yeah,
rates.
so it's a bit like your power lines and things like that, that don't necessarily have a plot of land that it owns where the pole sits. It's an easement and a right to use that land for that activity.
So this is picking up the company.
But we already are or we not?
Yeah, rating the
Right,
irrigation.
Yeah.
So you can see the orange line. It's what the status quo would be.
Oh, apologies,
But
yeah.
there's a good chunk of capital value there.
Yeah.
Sorry, a land value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I put the land value, capital value there, so you could see that that's different from, say, the trans power line, things like that, which don't.
So those.
That's my initial question though, is historically, a lot of irrigation companies don't own the land, still don't own the land. How can you double dip?
There might be an area where they have like a,
Right, but it's not the whole length of the race. Right, gotcha.
They'll get caught in dams and race, like some Burns glue or something, or the Manuricare. Get caught in the capital value of the dam and the capital value of the company.
there will likely not be the capital value recognised twice.
Not a company, they wouldn't recognise the company, it'd just be the physical assets.
And then we go to the two big large dams. And this is where a massive shift is going to capital value, 100%. With the scenarios. Scenario 4, it's the big one. It's ×2 differential. The purple one is the same differential as everyone else except for residential.
It says large dams, so small dams, like we have our smaller power schemes, but they're still on a differential, but they just.
So I didn't put them in there because depending on where they are.
Horseshoe bend.
The dam's differential stays for the status quo and for scenario 1. And that's where you can see in the large dam scenario that they've actually decreased because the other utilities have actually come in to the capital value. And then if we bring them back in under the full capital value, everyone else in scenario 2, you can see that they've actually gone up quite significantly based on their capital value.
So that is percentage of our rates is quite huge because it's about 10% of the rate.
Yeah.
And if you went to like the New Falls Dam, for example, another big dam, if you had big dam irrigation, it's quite a significant chunk of this modelling to offset the rate once, and that would.
As you recall at the start, I said there's a lot going.
So at the risk if we went to scenario 4 and we upset a whole lot of industry, do we find ourselves sitting in court with like some Meridian again, like they did in North Otago or wherever?
We can't control whether they take us to court. We can only control the process that we're going through.
Yeah.
You need to make sure that it's a lawful process, that you've made decisions that you're entitled to make. As you decide what's appropriate. That being said, the test of whether it is perverse is the test. And so is it perverse to have all of our groups paying the same rate? I would expect that is reasonable under the current law. Were to increase that that differential to 2, then we would, it could be possible. Either way, we need to do our work to explain the change and why the change is appropriate, and how we word that in the statement of proposal, and how we share the engagement and the consultation.
You come
With
with
everyone.
that scenario, given it's not that scenario 4
Yeah,
hasn't singled out one particular industry.
That's right.
That's a differential of 2 across a large scale
Yes.
of commercial and industrial interests, not just one.
that's right. And that works in our favour. But
Interested to know why dairy would have a differential of 2, but not horticulture, given they're both intensive land use. I was just thinking around that.
The main thinking behind it was just to give you guys an idea of what it looked like by changing a few rather than changing
Okay.
them all. So you could look at scenario 3 where we've actually dropped the residential. Everyone else has stayed higher. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of what would happen to a few. Doesn't mean that they have to stay like this. But it's something you could.
So I guess if you really wanted to have a feel how we feel, if we could play with those differentials ourselves anonymously, it'd be interesting to see how it looked. Because like, what does solar come under?
Under utility.
My argument is if I wanted to be snarky, I had a reason. You see the skid marks going into a gully. It went down.
Or is it a farm? I'm not sure where we're going.
I mean, I guess if we turn around and the opposition we have in our community to solar, we say, well, why don't we look at a differential of 2.5? And if we're going to have it environmentally attacked by mining and it's going to be in a shape we can't shape, we go, well, mining is advantage and disadvantages to some part of our community. Because to me, it's like everyone's got to be singing Kumbaya at the end of the financial year. And people are not happy with mining and they're not happy with large scale industrial. But so therefore you turn around and go, well, if we don't want to be just a big mining mega, what do we make 2.5 on that? And if we're going to have solar, which most people are one way or the other, there's opinions, we make 2.5 on that. And I agree with horticulture because it uses intensive water and irrigation, takes up development lands, and maybe it's 1.5, 1.2. And ultimately, if we can, and I know it sounds like managing the infrastructure, but Central Otago has been functioning incredibly well by just having everything is the way it is today, but it's the growth that we're going to have to try to manage and the adverse effects of some of these things. And the same with dairy. I mean, like some people will not be happy with 30, 40 or 50 new dairy farms going in across the country. So maybe it stays at 2. But then there'll be other people saying, well, hang on about these guys that have got cropping are going and doing this. Why is normal farming and sheep and beef?
I mean, Curtis, dairying higher because of the milk tankers.
Yeah.
Talking about,
Yeah.
you have trucks going all the time, whereas horticulture, it's only harvest.
But then, yeah.
But they're in different land use places too, which I mean, so it could be in the edge of town. So you got an industry there paying twice the rate, and it could be something like, I'm just saying that's always going to be the pressure, isn't it? Rural guys are going to go, hang on a minute, you look at all this, that's where a lot of the money's being generated, got capital value. And then you've got a 0.8 of a housing, which is a property speculator coming from Tauranga to build 1,000 houses. And actually they're getting subsidised by the industry that's been there for 100 years. It's a question that the farmer will tell me every time I go and talk to them.
I guess just to talk about the 0.8 for a start, I think it needs a little bit of explanation. That was put in there to reflect the fact that there is no GST deductibility or tax deduction. So it was a way to recognise that commercial operations in whatever form they are, from farming through to hydro, have that ability that your residents don't have. You could model that the other way, which is to put in a 1 for residential and a ×2 or more, whatever, for commercial activities across the range. But that was the reason we thought about having a look at that. And it makes 0.8 a bit of a nice sell as well, and still achieves the commercials to pay more. In terms of your for argument's sake, horticulture, I'm wondering whether that's actually a district plan issue rather than a rating issue. So that if you want to, because what I'm hearing is you might be wanting to discourage that type of development and more residential.
Well,
type
I'm
development.
saying that, to me, there's always going to be tension between the ratepayer, the business owner, and speculator, whoever that may be. And if, take Ramsey Solar Farm as a classic example, we're going to invest $1 billion in your community, and how good are we? And that's marvellous. And then you get BlackRock Investment Group's one of the ones most hated in the world, slash da-da-da. And actually, then the farmer next door, for capital value or rateable value of their land, is not relevant to the farming they're on, it's relevant to energy next door.
I guess what we're looking at with solar farm, we haven't got one yet in terms of something that someone can value. So any differential that we place on a solar farm is we don't know, and QV don't know how they're going to value that thing. They may come along and say, and do a similar exercise to how they've changed the valuations for the dams, and that's why they've gone up so much. They might turn around and say, right, we're going to use a replacement cost to value the solar farm, and it's going to be, instead of an underlying value of the land, it's going to be 4 times that because of the replacement cost. They've also got to take into account what they will classify as plant and machinery versus the actual capital value. They will not value and cannot value the plant and machinery component. So I guess what I'm saying is that I'm not sure that we are in a position right now to say, let's earmark solar farm.
But I guess, and I've brought this up for the last 5 years at this group, is this is where our job really lies, because we don't want to be playing catch up. And if you and I are sitting in the rest home in 20 years' time going, we got that wrong at that meeting in April, are we not better off trying to set? I know QV want to have a yarn about it. Tim McCall wants to talk to this group about how do we look at that and have a workshop, because if we get it right, like your large dams, it's exactly the same. It's generation, it's energy, and it's exported. So it's a net export, it's away from our community, it doesn't contribute. So the only way we can get it to contribute to our community is to offset the rates of the mum and dad living in Alexandria. And I'll be happy with point A. But when you've got foreign investment coming in by the billions of dollars and we haven't got a scenario to say, let's catch it, I'm going to go, well, we'll go at 3. Because they've got to prove that we're wrong. Not the ratepayer, he goes, hey, student, well done.
Going back a bit though, where we were talking about motels and hotels, for example, surely that is, if you like, it's a sort of a backdoor way of doing a bed tax, isn't it? Because that increase, if it comes in, it's actually going to be passed on to the customer.
Yeah, you'd think so. Yeah, you would. I mean, the tariff should
have
to go up to cover that. Yeah.
In our original decision to go from a land value to capital value, important element of that is that if you own more, you pay more. And so it's not so bad for the smaller hotels, but the bigger ones, yes, it is. So what I'm saying is, I'm not saying you're all wrong. And what I'm saying is we've got to remember where we've come from as part of this process, because when it comes to writing this up, that's how the statement of proposal is going to start with. Why we are going from LB to CV in the first instance.
Because we were trying to find a fairer system.
Yes.
For proportioning the costs.
Yes.
Some of that extra income is actually going to come from outside the area anyway.
Sorry, when you say extra income, you're talking about a redistribution of income because we don't get any more than our rates requires us. Our rates requirement.
Moving it.
It's just how it's spread across the pie.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
okay.
progression, yeah.
Right. So this is everyone together. The main purpose of this slide is to just show you where the big amounts are versus small amounts. So it's just a picture of everything except dams.
There's quite a lot less movement in that scenario 3 and 4
Yeah.
than I thought there would be across the board. That's really only sort of 3 or 4.
Slides.
Which are in your rurally based communities.
Large hotels, usually. Large farm goes down quite a lot.
But they're still like in rurally based. Yeah, that's not
Our
the
whole
problem.
community is rurally based.
Farms go down quite a lot.
So the large hotel will be disproportionate in the sense that it's probably only one in our region.
Perhaps more.
Yeah, and I guess well, that this what if we don't got another investor in and we got another couple of hotels, the share will be split over a bigger group of entities, or will it be bigger share of the rates?
It'll be what will happen if it's a similar value. It'll effectively take more of the rates across the rest of the base and pay it. This is all part of that capital value. Your share of the total capital value is the portion you pay. And I guess another question that you might want to ask yourselves, will those types of businesses come or not come if their rates are $26,000 a year under scenario 4, for argument's sake?
Well, given
Exactly.
the fact that house prices and therefore rates have hit $1 million in Cromwell, it hasn't stopped anyone from coming to Cromwell.
So I guess my question is, rates aren't usually the major determining factor in development.
Right.
And people will come where they can make money.
OPEX.
Yeah, I think that's really important, that understanding that people will tell us over and over again, they'll tell us through the process consultation that they can't afford to live there and stuff like that because of this change. The analysis says that rates isn't enough,
Yeah.
particularly in a commercial sense. The rates are too much. You were never going to make it. And I've seen reports from economists telling us that.
Under every scenario, there forestry pays less. That's quite.
Only because of what we modelled. I mean, if we change the modelling, that will change what they pay. Yeah.
How much would a differential of 2 change it though? It's not 2 times because there's a UAGC there, isn't there?
Yeah, it won't. I wouldn't have expected it because there's not a lot of capital value in there. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at.
So if you wanted to equate that, you would have to do something that Stu's suggesting is potentially, say, forestry, your differential 6 times or something like that. But we can model that. I mean, I can't answer your specific question.
That if it's been modelled elsewhere, the last thing we want is our beautiful silver tussock covered in trees.
Well, it is either way. Because they're all there. This is what the Warren Pines are there. So I sort of think forestry's got a little bit to answer for. And if council's got to manage the problem alongside partners, then, you know, my view is forestry should be paying a little bit towards that via the road.
Why aren't you saying times 6, like I said?
Because that's your idea.
But remember, it's going to bring no extra income in.
Like the proportion falls on them, yeah.
Yeah.
So they're covering it, essentially an externality they've created.
Unless you introduce a targeted rate specifically for that, and I'm not suggesting you do that at all. I think if we're going to go down a differential path, that would be the way to do it. So I think that's a takeaway for us. We'll look at forests in terms of what the cost might be to control wildings, and how that might be funded out of the forestry area through a different. Absolutely, yeah. We can absolutely do.
So is everyone happy with the large dams too? I mean, it's going to be, it's a significant jump.
So I guess what you've got to think about is, and look, when I say these things, I'm agnostic in terms of the differential, the purpose of the differential. You need to think about that, and you can immediately sort of say 40% benefit that commercials get from their status as a taxpayer and a GST claimer. So you already can look at, say, 1.5 times. Then you look at potentially what extra services they put on. And you might look at it, say, dairy. Well, okay, they've got tankers going backwards and forwards. That's 90 vehicle movements a day per tanker. That's what the equivalent is. So potentially 180 backwards and forwards up the road. So you could look at it and say, logically, dairy could pick up some more. Same with forestry. Ultimately, there's a component that so all of those things we need to have in our quiver so that we can document it and write it and say, this is why we did it. It's just saying we'll get hammered if we just don't have the reasoning behind it. And that's where you guys need to be.
I guess putting on a balanced fair hat, why don't we have a roading differential for maybe dairy and the rate be different? Because then they actually directly contribute to the roading component rather than the other part, because they pay their tax, they pay their GST, they pay the wages.
You could argue, though, the high capital value of the dairy farm covers
that anyway.
Yeah. And, considering they don't receive any more level of service than something in town, if not less.
Well, they sort of do on the road in front.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It covers it, doesn't it?
The reason I asked about the large dams is 1.2 or 1.5 not relevant because of this change in the dynamics. Because it's such a large entity.
Such a large entity, it's had a massive revaluation movement.
Up.
So
they get double whammy, don't they?
No one's getting double whammy.
No, we did ask.
They've got valuation, and if we go again, their valuation has increased probably because of the
what we're doing and what the valuation don't link.
There was no ability to make a huge amount of profit from.
I mean, to me, it's like, well, that's a discussion we're having, isn't it? It's like, to me, it's like, well, we've got other stuff that's coming in that we can. They know that they're going to walk in. If you are a gold mine or you are a solar farm or you are some new business, you might have a quite high component of rates. With the existing infrastructure, the existing people have contributed a lot. It's too, like for dams, large dams, is too high.
Well, again, I come back to the Rating Valuation Act and the rules in that act. The Government General, the Valuer General has decided, it's quite within their rights to do, that there needs to be a change in the valuation methodology. And unfortunately, we're the first cab off the rank. And what they've looked at is they have looked at the fact that those dams generate a significant amount of revenue for their shareholders. And the replacement value of it bears no resemblance to the value that they carried. And again, I would then come back to say, if everybody else in the district is based on that type of valuation, what makes them any different?
That's right.
And I don't see that there is a difference between the fact that their replacement cost is probably in the region of about 10 billion. They've been valued at about 2.9 billion. So I think that the valuer has got it right-ish. I'm not a valuer, so I don't know. They also have the opportunity to object to the evaluation and go through that process and get it finalised. as we all do. But I guess at the end of the day, the question that we would ask, given that we only have the ability to levy it on capital value, land value, or annual value, what makes them any different? And if they're not different, then it should be what it should be. And then you need to decide, do you want to set differentials on, for argument's sake, commercial activities across the district, so that the commercial activities who get benefits that your residential, because what we're trying to do is make it fair. That's what their guiding principle is, that first priority that you had from the Alicia Mackay workshops, is to make it fair, and differentials are a way to do that. 0.8 or the 2, they would give you the same effect. So I guess it makes it less complicated if we apply the rules and say there is no difference between a utility that is a power line versus a utility that is a dam versus a Resine colour shop versus whatever, a New World. No difference in terms of the rules that we're going to apply.
So the argument, if you look at put your big view on, is that if it's I guess the Resine colour shop is a contributing community asset that contributes within its community.
Damn, the benefits mainly outside of our community.
Yeah.
So I look at these power prices are going up, and I can see the headlines already with power companies complaining that they're going up because we've increased their rates. They say that it doesn't benefit our community, you're spreading the load over New Zealand. The electricity is not used here.
I guess what I'm saying is that, and it's just my angst after going through the solar farm stuff, is that these big companies, and you have a classic example now, the government going broke, or is broke. The foreign investment owns a big power company up the road here, sell out because we need the capital to keep your credit rating down, to just so we can pay to get crook out. Our community's not benefiting from that liquid massive asset. And you could argue the same about dairy, and that the export of dairy, the person at the supermarket pays more for it, or fruit or anything else. But lights to go back to the solar, we're not front footing the growth of energy companies that are going to come down the line to us.
In a rating respect, we can only act on what has already happened for rating. And
Which we haven't got.
Essentially, yeah. Payment. Obviously, the RMA is the start of that. So when it happens, that's when the valuer general and QV come and do their thing and put a valuation on it.
So can we, and I know going back to Tim McCaw, can we not be a part of that conversation with QV now? Look, can you guys not sit around the table and go, well, actually, we seem to think, and the argument of solar would be that it takes away productive land wherever it is.
Yeah.
And that land would again generate at a rate, argue that a dam too, it could have been environmental things, but the real true cost is a chunk of land generates $2,500 a hectare for agriculture, $3,000 for carbon. You've taken it away to generate that. How do we pick it? How do we capture that? And it's actually the next stage. Like if we're a cheap place to be, we'll have all the solar farms in the world here, and the ratepayer doesn't get an ounce out of it. And I guess that's how do we protect the next 20 years of rates, because they're not going to go down. Well, they are sort of a scenario if we balance it. How do we?
Is there a pathway? I guess Stu was asking, because this has come round to this table quite a few times over the last few years, is how do we capture that? What is a significant change in land use between grazing and commercial solar production?
I guess the answer to that is we don't know, because I don't know how QV may turn around and say, you can graze sheep under the panels, therefore the highest and best use is pastoral farming, right? And that's obviously not the answer that we want. I guess because of the legislation and the stuff that we deal with, we can review that as often as we like. I mean, there's a cost to do that review, and that's a public consultation, etc. And we will always be behind the 8 ball, but we won't be that far behind the 8 ball to miss out on years and years and years of revenue. I guess we could put a multiplier of 6 in, and then QV have come along and then they've valued it on the same basis as hydro. You know, they optimised the prival value. So what's the current value to build it? And that might be 600 million. So that's their capital value. And we've got 600 million at a multiplier of 6. That's kind of double dipping. Whereas if we had 600 million at a multiplier of 2, the same as the hydros, for argument's sake, that's a fairer solution. I guess, and this kind of goes a bit further into things like short-term accommodation that we're going to talk about. We actually don't know what the detail is in terms of our data to work that out. So
Paint a beautiful picture when you sit at the hearings and sit at public shops and tell you that their $1 billion they invest in your community is going to employ 500 people. They're all going to live here. The roads will be busy. They're bringing stuff in from Port Jarman. It's going to be wonderful. My argument at the time, we pay 140,000 community fee, and we're going to do that. Your community will be fantastic. And never hear from them again. It's like, okay, well, we have factor of 2.5 when you have $1.5 billion, and you lodge your consent, you start paying your rates. You pay your community fund, but we're not capturing that.
I guess
Only capture what it's rated at.
what it's valued at.
Which we're not sure of what that value
That's
will
right,
be
we
because
don't
we
know.
don't know. And I guess to me, it's like saying, well, are we frightened, or have we got in Australia? Is there not a modelling we can use where they've gone into rural places, or and we're talking about a community board in Cromwell, or maybe looking for solar down there? We must have some idea what its value. We value what it returns.
No, we know what it. I mean, that's the difference between QV will value it at a point in time, right? We will know if we're going to build something in Cromwell, we know what capital we've invested in it. So we know and what the book value is going to be. We'll depreciate it. We'll get it revalued every year as we go through, the same as we would any other asset that we hold. I guess what QV do, it's more of a rateable value, and they won't know that until they've worked out how they're going to do it. And the discussions with Tim will probably help them formulate how that might happen. But they've got to be robust in their rules as well, because they can get challenged over the types of rules they bring in to value stuff. So, I mean, could we put a differential in, or do we just say, well, the initial differential is going to be times 2?
Yeah, and you could have a line on here for solar farms and a differential of 2, and then it becomes a line item like forestry.
Which utility? Just sits with
It's a utility.
It's just going to be
just
just
sits with utility. It's already.
And it is an iterative process. So 3 years' time, this council could look at it and go, you know what? We need to relook at this again, because what we talked about 3 years ago. So we don't have to get it absolutely right this time around, because we haven't done for God knows how.
Solar farms in New Zealand, so QV must be rating some of them.
This is by far the biggest.
Yeah. And all I'd say is that they've changed their valuation rules on hydros. This is we're the first cab off the rank. So we don't know what their valuation rules were, whether it was, they treated all of the panels as plant machinery, in which case it's the underlying land value.
I'm not just thinking about that, but like solar farming of any solar farm going up.
Yeah, like the one in Christchurch, but maybe it's too new as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this process is allowing us to front foot ideas that we can see coming down the line, and not go, oh, we've got a shock. I mean, it's
if it
a great
goes-
bit of work.
If it goes in as utility with the differential of 2, it's
Yeah, and then it's picked up.
better than the partial of 1. It's a step in the
Yeah.
direction.
Happy that we've got enough of a steer on that particular topic to bring it back around the board?
Yeah, one of our rationales for doing the review and going to a simple rating base and not having lots of different targeted rates and things like that is because of the uncertainty of the world that we live in, and things changing. You know, we're mid in moving water out of our business, and there's other matters coming from the government that's going to change local government. So there's a lot of change happening, and then there's a lot of change happening with AI and all those things. So we're going down the right track to be flexible. So being flexible means we can do changes in future years quickly, because we've set it up so it's a nice, simple process to change things, as opposed to some of those councils that have put lots and lots of targeted rates. Undoing that is trouble. They're full of money and reserves and things like that. They've been collected and not spent and things like that. So we're in a good position for flexibility, I think. Just being flexible and looking at the world slightly different, we're going to move to something that was out of the box and not expected. But this is the UAGC, and we've talked about it being 0.69 as a consequence of moving waters out of the business. And the legislation gives us 5 years to correct back to 30%. But when we look at these two scenarios, so we've introduced a new scenario 5 here, which is going back to 30%. By going back to 30%, you're not dealing with a small. It's a relatively small change.
It's a small,
but it's happening every year for 5 years, and so it's always going to be on the book having this thing. Given that a large number of ratepayers would be getting a decrease in these scenarios we're looking at, would it be a good time to just tweak it and go back to the 30% and not have that item on your agendas for the next 5 years, and the relatively small size?
Yeah.
And the positive impact that you're getting just
so
effectively
utilities. What we're saying here is we have to show this, because it would be unfair to just show rates at 40.69 as they currently are, knowing that we have to move back and getting people to make a decision on 40.69 and say, yeah, that's the option we want, but actually they have to move by legislation over time back to 30%. Now, this will either show you a picture in year 1 or in year 5, assuming nothing else changes. So we would have to consult on this anyway to show the end result for some of the rate paying groups.
Yeah.
As Stephen said, because there's some, pretty much everyone, maybe with the exception of the large hotel, but pretty much everyone is getting a reduction, because those rates are, you talked about 4.6 million in the 2 dams. You've also got to remember there's another $500,000 in utilities that we don't collect right now. So you're actually talking about 5.1, and our rating is going to be about 45 million. So that's 1/9 of our rates is in those 2 categories. So the benefits flow across to everybody in the first year of change. But we will, as I say, we will have to consult if we decide, whichever option we decide to do, on a change back to 30% over 5 years. So our suggestion is do it in one hit.
Just flick through the next 2 slides.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what happens with the utilities. They're all paying a bit more, and then you get this big extra chunk paid for by the dams.
That's because we're taking less out of by fixed charges and more out of capital value. So the higher your capital value, right.
This going back to 30%, but with differentials all at one.
Scenario 2. So it's modelling scenario 2.
Back to 30%.
But going back to 30%, yeah. And scenario 2 was just picked because it was scenario 2, just.
So what does scenario 4 look like going back to?
It's a similar situation. It's the same principle. The higher the capital value, the more you'll pick up.
Right, that takes us to the heat maps. Yes, please. What we've got down this end is we've got status quo, the colours. So the green colours, when you're better off, paying less. Yep, the red colours, when you're paying more, and when you're in this yellow spot, that's when you're not paying. So that's what we see. So what we're seeing here with the status quo, we've got some outliers, okay, which is some of the deep purple ones,
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we've got within our rating database, it tends to look at the parent's property. So sometimes there might be a change between a parent, and the parent might end up having 2 children. And unfortunately, you might see some swings just basically like that, where someone might swing up or swing right down. So in the status quo in your plan one, you'll see a big property there, which is purple. That is one that has just changed this year from a parent situation to a parent and 2 children. So it's taking the parent, and the parent is not rateable. So only the children are rateable. So that one, there's one that is a little bit odd, and shows right up in the middle of the map. So this is only to give you a picture. This is not an exact science, all I'd like to say. The other thing that's not missing is the utilities, like your lines companies, your telecommunications, because they don't have land. Therefore, you won't see them in these scenarios, but your main dams are on there. So you can see them coming through.
Well, these big ones, you're not going to see the towns very well. We've got separate ones for towns. But what you see is an increase for rural. And then as we move off and start, we get a darker green in here. And then we start getting, so these are purples are getting a lot less rates. They're down the bottom, they're not up the top of the purple. So we're starting to get in there. And then you get down to scenario 4, and it's a huge amount of benefit going into that.
That's at 40% though. So if you win 30,
That's right.
you have a heat map for the 30.
Goes up. We haven't done a heat map for it, no.
Too much to print.
We can't,
Right.
Scenario.
but that's also given that pastorals in scenario 4 at times 1. Maybe it shouldn't be.
You went to scenario 5, you mean?
No, scenario 4.
Yeah.
See all the purples and the green.
Yeah.
That's because pastoral
Scenario.
of 1.
Yes.
As opposed to commercial. I mean, you could argue that it should be commercial, but we've only put it in as 1, hence why there's a lot more purple on that map.
Sort of capture, it evens out if you put your UAGC back to 30 anyway.
A little bit, it won't necessarily change a lot of that, but we will model that just to see what.
Because that's probably the true one. If your recommendations are do it in 1 hit.
Yeah. If you want to have a look at them properly, feel free to spend 5 or 10 minutes quizzing them, or we can box on with it. You do have pictures of them all here.
What sort of lens do we put on schools? Non-radar, okay, so that,
Schools are only rated for water, wastewater and collection.
I see
Oh,
that,
not right.
they've changed colour of the evidence, doesn't matter.
Government.
That's good. That's clap GST.
Fingerprints.
They get the rates up, they get the rates up the money.
I've had enough tax paid.
Won't go there.
Some great thing.
It's the scenario, it's very simple.
That's good, that's because it's been developed then.
Is this? This one.
Yeah, it's the back here. It's that.
That's council land, that one in there?
Yeah, what?
Sorry, you doing a little paper pen?
Stealing it.
That belongs to the girl, I think.
Around about as much, they do it for you.
But that doesn't.
Just a model.
Yeah.
Oh, I
So it can't be the prices much because that's this corner closer to here.
I should give them some time.
Oh, you want to-
No, actually, that's.
Just we would own.
Yeah.
No, there's a tribute. Yeah. I'll put that up. Oh, no.
And that must be it.
That's it.
That must be it. Because that's the orchard, that's Henry Vanderbilder's orchard. This is Shannon Farm.
This, the new industrial, really.
Really hard to show them.
Yes, maybe that isn't it? That's
Well, looking at this, Tim's land, Town land,
I think we just run off those.
to blocking.
These printouts,
Yeah, he's on the next driveway along.
these aren't the township side.
Yeah,
Oh, they're
they're
in the-
Just comments, was there.
What other stuff did you want to cover off?
Kids go playing here.
we're going to show you the heat maps for the towns now, so you can kind of see, you've seen the rural impacts. We'll just flick through the towns now and then really just get you to nail down really what you're after, so we can, because we are a little confused, to be fair.
The one on the screen, the Alexandra is a status quo. So you can see that there's some very nice light sort of green colours with little movement, and there's a few orange changes, and there are some reds, which is more the properties which are being subdivided at the moment. Probably notice those ones. That's kind of where it's going to be for the next financial year. Then we move into the scenario 1, and you can start to see that there are some sort of stronger yellow here as we do the change to the capital value rather than staying as the status quo. But majority that's still quite soft in colours, so your residentials aren't necessarily getting pink. It's starting to move into those little lifestyle commercial sort of sectors there. So scenario 2, which brings in the dens into the capital value mix, doesn't have a huge impact between scenario 1 and scenario 2, but there are some softer colours. Yeah. But now scenario 3, which is the residential at a factor of 0.8, and everyone else's factor of 1.
We didn't want to show you that one, it's too scary.
That's the dams retaliating. Cut your hair.
That's how they've responded to your rates increase.
I guess I could, if you could imagine something that's more green. Because
Ross, get the
it's
chalk out.
it's 0.8, that's why, so.
Has to be,
Yeah.
has to be.
I can see
Lots of green.
Better than roll Paris.
Yeah.
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 The community.
Do anything, right?
We don't know what's happening with that.
Pictures are too complicated. Tell us about.
I guess you do have hard chocolate zone one scenario, so you can kind of, it's gonna.
Make that plug and plug.
This is our level.
Talk through why scenario 4 is the scenario that you've chosen to print the map in colour graph to be on it.
I think there's 2 and 3 are around us.
There should be there.
Yeah.
There's no subliminal message in there, madam.
Well, that's what I was thinking. I was doing, I've got it for. Sorry, there was
Completely impartial.
5 scenarios with their maps. With
Here's a print out.
But here we go.
Lots of green.
So we'll look to the green for the scenario 3. In your residential. Then going into final scenario 4, which is where we start adding a factor of 2 to your more commercial activities. You start to see those areas taking on quite a bit of red.
Although most of the red ones in that picture are schools.
Schools are non-rateable.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that kind of makes it a little bit.
Yeah.
The red skews it because the red looks really bad, but when you look at that and say, well, most of those reds aren't actually paying rates.
Yeah, so we will have a wee look into those. That might just be how it's all flowing through.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we move to Clyde. This is us under the status quo. So there was a little bit of a change in the valuations in Clyde, and some areas go up. But you'll see the big red at the top, which is the dam, and then there's some subdivisions towards the bottom of the map there as well, which are also in red. And then there's been some valuation changes on our own property and also some uplands.
Golf course.
So then moving into the scenario 1, and we're still sort of looking at the same colouring, but there's a wee bit of a change in those areas with some high property values, especially out into those lifestyle areas, and also where there's new housing developments in the most recent years. You would notice that top there. Township. Moving into scenario 2, which puts the dams into the same calculation as everyone else. There hasn't been a huge shift. It is mainly just due to the fact that Clyde did have a bit of an increase in its valuations. Round. Moving into scenario 3, you'll see that the residential is looking green there, which is the expectation with it having a factor of 0.8. Then moving into and there's a little bit more orange pulling through in those sort of commercial zones.
Just wondering, because you can kind of see what's happening in the trend. If you want to go through all of the towns, we can. You've got the maps.
Probably just Cromwell would be worth having a look at as well.
Yeah.
That'll be good.
Come on. I mean, green, what about more?
This is from status quo.
I don't.
They did have some quite significant valuation increases. And you can see that showing through there and the yellows and then the reds down to the zones. Here we go and see that slide, Dr. Cromwell. And there's a few greens pulling through there as well. So that's just the movement for the valuations and through into the capital value. Going into scenario 2. It's very similar to scenario 1 there as well. Scenario 3. And that residential area is looking quite green. There are some areas there which have reduced quite dramatically with the purples there, and then more, actually more reserve land, and that sort of thing. So those are kind of a little bit of an outlier where there's no
Undeveloped or whatever.
lower capital value. The final scenario, scenario 4, is where we have those more commercial pipelines pulling through, with a factor of 2. And there's roughly in those sizes, you kind of expect them.
Not as green in the residential, right? Generally,
Yeah,
All green.
yeah.
still green.
Yeah.
So we've got 2 scenarios with differential limit. And that's 3 and 4. What we saw in the townships here is lots of green, in 3, 1. Yep. So lots of green in there with that, 0.8 adjustment. And then this is the, one where gone to the differential of 2 on those rural, some of those rural businesses, particularly these ones in purple, are getting the benefit of it. Once. So those are essentially our 2 choices. I don't think this is part of the journey to getting here. So it's a case of you feel that these are appropriate to have both of these as an option, and then we develop from this to develop a preferred option. These 2. Yeah.
People comfortable with those 2 being the scenarios that we'd like modelled? It sort of captures most of what we've been talking about for the last probably 12 months around making the spread more fair.
They contain the levers we want to.
Yeah.
So that's.
The only thing I would add to the stuff that Stephen's been saying is we did not model pastoral, specialist agriculture or horticulture at a differential. We left it at 1. Now that might be something that we want to discuss today, so that we can model it at 2 or some different number. And I think that it's probably, you know, if we're going to use the argument of it's an industry and it makes money and whatnot, then sorry, that's how the commercial.
That's how the commercial one
Yeah,
works.
exactly.
Yeah.
If we're going to apply the same logic, we should be applying it, I think, to pastoral and whatever's another, and the agriculture and horticulture and forestry, which is something else you were talking about. So effectively, we would leave residential and lifestyle as 1s, potentially others. Yeah. And model everything else as a factor of 2.
But as you bring the UHGC back to 30, you shift a greater proportion onto policies.
So that'll go back towards.
It'll go back towards pastoral, these models.
Yeah, but it won't ever.
Well, go back to all the high value industry, sorry.
I guess what you're saying though is that a farm is the same as a house.
Doesn't use any more council service.
It's not a use of pays though. It's a tax.
This is about
And it's
tax.
a tax on wealth.
Yeah.
And wealth is measured in terms of value.
Yeah.
It's also relative to the service, is it not?
No. No, not at all. You would go and assess that, but at the end of the day, rates are not used pays. They are not whether you use the service or not. And quite often, if you use the service, you pay through user charges anyway. And I think around planning, building consent, that type of thing, you would pay for that if you use it. But it's not whether you use libraries or roads in towns or stormwater or whatever. That's never what rates are about. Rates are basically, right at the fundamental level, rates are a tax, and they are a tax on wealth.
Similar to your income tax.
Yep.
The services we pay towards for those, not everybody has to use all of those services.
The only thing that you can do is you can make it more progressive with fixed charges or less fixed charges, because therefore that's more true in terms of wealth tax, or you can make it regressive with the use of fixed charges. unfortunately, we were and are right now at the maximum of 29.53. We can only go to 30%. So we are as progressive as we can get. We could always get progressive by reducing the UAGC, but we haven't, because we recognise that that does have an impact. So I guess the question is, if you take forestry or horticulture, which you were talking about before, intensive, it's primary industry stuff. Do you think it should be the same as, because you will have to talk about why we don't see it as being and I'll put that in inverted commas, commercial activity. And not commercial activity as per QV's valuation, but
Commercial activity is the easier one to say. It's either a commercial activity or it isn't, as opposed to picking winners and losers of, oh, well, your food production, so you should get a better rate than someone selling something at Mitre 10, or then has potential to become quite convoluted. And
yes,
so
That's what I keep playing in my head, comparing New World against the farm. But
whereas if you say commercial,
it's a wealth tax. It's not a, you've got 25 truck movements and you've got one.
When I first started at local body politics, we were trying to get we were trying to get our services for our community, and the cost of running those services was to be split fairly and evenly amongst our community. Now, if you take that approach, but that's not, that's irrelevant, where it's just generating a wealth tax, which it's not.
No, hang on.
Because we only generate the tax actually for the cost of running our business, whatever our business is.
That's how we collect it. If you go back to 2005, the Shand report.
Yeah.
The Winston Peters, I think, at the time commissioned. They had a royal commission on rating, and it was the report came back, and it was, I don't know who Shand was, but it was his report. He came back and said that rates should only be maximum of 5% of average household income. That is why we've modelled scenario 3 at 0.8 to try and get close to that 0.5 as possible, 5% as possible, and scenario 4 where we've had the differential, which effectively they do similar things. The differential on commercial activities will go up and reduce the rates to residentials, because it was recognised at the time that commercial activities could be in terms of offsetting and claiming than your residential person could do. So that goes, you may have heard that bandied around in terms of the 5%. It's very difficult to, where you've got things like Waitaki that have put in a 19% rate rise consultation for this year. That's going to definitely kick it over 5%. So that's why we've kind of tried to separate.
So if it's a if it's a wealth tax, which we all agree it is, why any differentials? Because you capture it all with the CV.
Exactly. Yep, absolutely.
So why not scenario 2 should be the fair one if we're going to be truly down the line fair on everyone.
Absolutely.
And if
no, because 3's got a differential for residential.
Well, that's
so 2 should be.
but 3 factors in the fact that residents can't claim GST,
and all that stuff.
whereas commercial.
Yeah, but that's not a wealth tax issue.
That's straight.
I mean, the argument to this, and this is where we're going right back on its head.
Have you had your?
If it's a wealth tax, it's a wealth tax on capital gain. And the only time I agree with Chris Hipkins is you're going to have a capital gains tax to actually redistribute the wealth. So if you came to Ranford,
capital gains tax.
But you went to
no ability to install a capital.
But you went to Ranford 2 years ago. You've doubled your money in a year. You contributed nothing. That's happened. But in this scenario, you're only going to pay 0.80% of it.
I get, well, no, that's one. Yeah, that's one of the scenarios.
So effectively, it's not about income you earn, because you can be retiree getting no income at all, but your capital value has doubled in Central Target in the last 5 years. And then yet you turn around a commercial business and actually the lifeblood and infrastructure of your community, It was paying its GST, paying its PAYE, paying its profitable tax, 39 cents in the dollar. And they get hammered again to subsidise the ratepayer.
So the 0.8's in there.
This is that it's,
Yeah.
the rates, we're looking for a system that's more fair than what we
Yeah.
have now.
You want it fair.
There's no ability to say your rates are set based on your personal income.
No, but that's, you go back to the scenario when Sir Peter said it had to be no greater than 5% of your.
No, that was with the recommendation.
Yeah,
It's
but
very difficult to get that information out, obviously.
That was for households.
Yeah.
When we look at the UAGC of 40.69 and our need to get back to that 30% within the 5 years, what is the pathway that is going to smooth that transition the best for our ratepayers if we are going to go potentially with a scenario 3 or 4 that results in a reduction in rates? Is it better for them to have that reduction but then move to the 30% straight away? Or is it better to have the reduction and then you're going to see that, recognising that we'll also likely be operating in a rates cap scenario?
Yeah.
So are we better to try and model that 30% in at the same time?
I think we need to see that.
Which we did globally in terms of those bar charts that said this is what it is now. If you and we've made an assumption that if you did that over 5 years, nothing else would change because we can't model that variability in it. You can see that the residential stuff goes down a little bit and the larger capital value goes up, and that's what we'd expect to happen because there's more capital value involved in some of those businesses. So in answer to your question, I would suggest that it is done in one hit. You've got all of the benefits of your change, just make the move to get the 30%.
But given 30% is mandated, you're saying councils have options to get to that over a period of time?
5 years, you've got 5 years to change that.
Okay.
And that came in the water services legislation because they recognised that by removing a whole bunch of revenue, councils were already, and we were in exactly that boat. Councils were at their 30%. It tipped them over the 30% and they needed a mechanism to get back.
Yeah, you've got to remember that you're in a sweet spot.
Yeah.
There's been a massive revaluation change for an industry. And it's created an opportunity. So $170 UAGC that's collecting about 1.107, collecting about 1.5 million. A huge chunk of that going, instead of all of those big commercial players paying $170 for the UAGC, whereas they could be paying a far larger portion of it from day one rather than spreading it over 5 years.
You've got to steer on a direction for that from scenario 3 and 4.
I was just thinking about the argument why you would leave farming at a differential of 1 and dairying, for argument's sake, at a differential of 2 if you were going scenario 4, and forestry at a differential of 2. I guess the answer is what impacts potentially on the environment. Just thinking out loud here, does a farm or an orchard, maybe not so much an orchard, compared to forestry, dairy, because those, they're agricultural, silviculture, so it's a primary industry. How do you see those compared to farms, or should we be looking at differentials, different differentials for those? And my advice would be run them all at 2. Whatever that, just
All agriculture.
all agriculture. The only ones that wouldn't be, and we'd have to look into what other, there's a other category there. Leave lifestyle and residential at 1 because that's where it's really residential after all, I think, and run everything else through it 2.
Is that in a way subsidisation? Just
What are you subsidising? It's
hey,
No, 0.8, I'm saying ignore the 0.8.
One,
I think if you went 0.8, you leave everything else at 1, it does the same thing as leaving residential at 1 and put everything else at 2. It's just another way of selling that concept. It's a differential. The differential between 1 and 2 is a lot more than between 0.8 and 1. I guess what are you trying to achieve? That's really what you're saying.
The starting point is treating agriculture as one, you know, from a simplistic point of view, all agriculture is captured up in that, in 2.
Yep.
We're
Treat it the same.
And 10 years down the track, you know, I mean, it's, you know, to be breaking things down into orchards and this and that, that seems
It's
quite
complicated.
complicated.
And I would argue that having something as a 0.8 would only reinforce the idea that everything else is subsidised in residential.
Yeah.
That's good.
It feels
Because if you start at a 1,
Yeah.
but if you can bring back both of those scenarios to us, recognising that no matter what we choose, some people will be happy and some people will be unhappy.
no, 3, you could just change it. So residential's 1 and then everything else goes to make up the difference of that 0.2 is 1.1 or whatever it needs to be. Just reverse engineer the number.
How do we capture this? And I'll go back to, it may not happen now because the world's changed place when we started this process. How do we capture this unchallenged growth in our region that puts equity back on the person who's already been living here for 20 years?
I guess from a rating perspective, you don't really want to. And I'll tell you why you don't want to, because the more you have the increase, the higher the increases in your values, effectively, the lower the actual dollars you should pay per. So more people paying should pay less in theory because you're collecting the same. What you're talking about potentially is a district plan issue. You want to slow the growth down.
Manage it.
Yeah, I don't think that's. I think what we've actually seen is if you turn around and said, okay, we want to manage growth in the Cromwell area because that's going gangbusters. Even if you put the rates differential up to 2, I think there's still way too much money to be made in building, owning and then selling in Cromwell than 2 differentials going to deter you from doing that. I don't think rates is.
It's not.
The
Realistically, it's not.
So I think it's.
That's government policy, which views building more quicker
Yeah.
is the solution. So we'll always be reaching out in that.
Talking a few $1,000s versus potentially hundreds of thousands.
So if we can just clarify, the 2 things you want to model is you want us to look at scenario 4 and change everything to 2 apart from, now I've just found out other relates to halls and those types of things, and they will usually get a rates remission. So it's 1, so it should be 1. Pastoral, change that to 2, specialist horticulture to 2, horticulture to 2, and forestry to 2. And model that.
That scenario.
For that scenario 4. So that's the first one. What was the second one you wanted to look at?
You need the UAGC back at 30.
UAGC
Back to
Yeah.
30.
back to 30 over time
On year 1.
in year 1.
On both of them. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that. Yep. So really what we're saying is that your favour is more towards 4, but changed to reflect the differential of 2 for anything that looks like a commercial activity.
And if I was being fair to myself, I'd say that the differentials on some of those others, other than your agriculture ones, should be higher.
Okay.
I'd say if it's a wealth tax, your differential should all be 1. Because you should just rely on the capital value to capture it all. But you're right, like what we've just established,
That's exactly right.
having a differential won't change behaviour around land use, perverse outcomes and such. So why have a differential at all?
Correct. And we can actually show you that compared to different scenario 2,
Yeah.
because that's just everybody pays what their capital.
Yeah, and I accept the argument for rigid residential don't have the tax advantages, so maybe 0.8's pretty fair.
Well, they do a capital
But
gain.
then if we've established that the perverse outcomes that we're trying to prevent won't be prevented by a differential, what's the point of it?
Well, that's, okay, that's a discussion.
And then you talk about, residential, but you can sell your residential and you don't pay tax. You sell your sheep and cattle, you do pay tax. So it is a tax benefit to being a residential producer and selling a house.
So we'll model, we'll put scenario 2 as the base, which is differentials of 1 throughout, which is basically, this is what it would be in its raw form.
Yeah.
We will then compare it to, and we will do that 40.69 and 30% in year 1. So we'll model that. So it'll be scenario 2, scenario 2A, scenario 4, and scenario 4A, with 4 being 2 times multiplier for everything but residential and other and lifestyles.
Got 3 in there, eh?
I think 3 is there much inclination to have 3 around the table?
I reckon that it's a fair to have a 0.8 on residential because they can't deduct GST or income tax advantage of them.
Arguably, though, that would further
That's
strengthen your case for a scenario 2 where everybody's just in the same and it's capital value is the across the board market.
We haven't got the differential now, we're not at that stage. Like we haven't, to me, that my differential is going to be against those,
the middle ground.
those energy companies, those mining companies, those forestry companies that are outside of our traditional. If you took our 50-year today,
Lots of them they come
that's
down.
what that's build our community. With others are going to break it down.
Yeah. I guess the differential of 2
Will change it.
reflects that
Theory.
ability to deduct
Okay, sorry.
GST, to tax and all that carry on, because you're paying twice as much as a residential who, if you say 1 times differential is your base, you just pay it. 2 times differential, you're not actually, from a cash flow perspective, going to be at 2 times, you're going to be at about 1.6.
So that is scenario 3.
No, that's 4.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so if we ran 4A, 4B, so you'd have status quo as your one option. 2A, 2B, you'd decide on which one you wanted to do that. That's your 40.69, 30% on a differential of 1 across the board. And scenario 4, change those commercial activities to 2 and do a 30% on that, see what that looks like. We can absolutely do that for the next.
You're not entertaining the residential at 0.8. I don't know.
Oh, look, it's not up to me. It's you.
There's only so much work that can be done. What are the things that we think actually might be
But
a
if you've
dollar?
got residential back at 1 and everything else is at 2, it's a bit like having a 0.8 to a 1.
Well, we don't know. We need to see it.
Okay, we'll model, because all we got to do is model 1 more on
That's what I
30%.
mean. Yeah.
So we'll do that. We'll give you that picture so you can look at it next time.
How do we get behavioural changes in the wee things that we've been talking about going forward, unless we look at it down the road and come back to that differential?
Well, by doing more rating for you helps.
Well, I mean, I guess that's, we feel like we're rushing this.
There's probably too a case to be made for saying this is what it's going to look like for 3 years. And then by the time we get to the end of this 3-year period, we probably want to look at it again, especially if we're operating under a rates cap or operating under a combined territory or a shared service, or so much is going to change in the next 3 years. I think this is actually going to need to come back quite quickly. But in the meantime, we could get to a position that is more fair from year 1 of our long-term plan next year.
I think it would be fair to say that you're not going to get this perfect in year 1.
No, that's right. Get a per.
No.
But I mean, all, you know, we've had this, come to that big part of the discussion that we've actually just stayed the same. What we haven't, the behavioural change, take forestry, what we're talking about. Now is our chance to put a differential of 3. Because
No, you've got any chance to do that, right? That's not restricted to this particular, we're doing this. And look, if that's the I guess the meetings view, we'll model it at 3. But the issue we can't keep modelling and modelling and modelling and modelling. Yeah. At some stage, you've got to sit down and you say, right, okay, I'm comfortable with a starting position, say for argument's sake of 2.
but I'm not.
But there's a majority. What's the
So I
majority?
guess what I'm saying is that should we be having that chat louder here now, going, well, is everyone happy with those 0.2 differential from an only one person?
probably a really good starting point for us to bring back, because our conversation of do we then vote for, no, we want 3 for just forestry, or we want 3 for just dams, that can come in the public part of our meeting when we're looking at what is modelling, when we're picking what's going to go out for consultation. But I don't think in the workshop is now where we pick winning and losing industries.
As long as we can have that robust chat.
I mean, if you look at our timetable, today was kind of, this has been useful today actually to coming up with almost the final starters of the race, if you like. We do have another meeting on May the 11th where we really need to get to the point where we can nail the direction that you want us to head in. And look, as a concession to you, Stuart, maybe we'll run a scenario with 3 in it for forestry, just to see what it looks like.
We're governed by a rates cap. We're governed by exponential costs coming down our line. And we're now been told we've got avenues of potential. I'm only playing the game, a 10-year, 30-year game, that we have ability to put some mousetraps out already to see if we can catch them. And I just want to see what it feels like.
Yeah, this is not a weekend.
Yeah.
It's not like once you've set this, it stays in place for the next 20 years.
It's Tuesday, but you want to set the theme that we're looking at.
changes.
So if you do, so the next council looks at it, you say, no, this has been discussed and looked at and agreed in principle. If you, it might make you no more money at the moment, but in time if that changes, you've got a chance of actually appropriating more money out of them for polluting outside of their area.
Rates doesn't make money. It just redistributes.
I don't actually think race controls behaviour actually either.
We're not.
Getting something out of their pocket.
Is there anything else you wanted to cover off?
I just wanted a quick short-term accommodation.
Yeah.
You've got 5 minutes. We'll just blast through that once this thing's come up. Inclusive of GST, we currently rate for about 1.71 million. And it's differentiated on a capital value basis. That's how it's differentiated. So the residence pays just under 600, rural 450, commercial smidge over 600k, dams 69.
The tourism rate.
This is, tourism rate, sorry. So that includes your accommodation providers who contribute to that rate. It funds visitor information centres, destination management and tourism development within the district. I was going to say the dictionary there, but it's not the word. And council has expressed a view that you want to include a change in how the tourism component is collected. And I would just strongly urge you to remember that it's not going to generate any additional income unless you decide to increase the spend. This is not going to get more money, it's just going to redistribute it. So you need to consider the purpose of the new rate and what problem are you trying to solve and who will pay. So they may be valid questions and you've got valid answers for those. We need to have that conversation. And I think it's the next 5 minutes, we're not going to have that conversation, but we'll give you this PowerPoint. So if you can think about those things for the next time. We have to consider what information do we need to implement this and what do we need to do to get that information, because currently from a rating perspective we don't have any of that information, so it would be an almost start from scratch. That's not to say that it can't be done, but there's going to be some resources that need to be put into it.
Could be administratively heavy. How does it work if the government was to do a bed tax?
Okay. Depending on how they do the bed tax, if they're going to administer it, or if they're going to, which is what I'm going to talk about here, a short-term, apparently they're mooting an idea of a short-term register, a register for short-term accommodation providers, and we could use that to rate those activities if we know it's effectively a ready source of information and we don't have to do anything to get that information, I would expect. It's not expected to be ready before our rates review is complete. But the good thing is about rates reviews, we can re-look at this in future years and consult on those changes only. If we wanted to bring in a short-term accommodation rate, we can just do that bit. We don't have to do the whole lot. So it can be done at an annual plan time. It doesn't have to wait to an LTP. It's a special consultative procedure. And we would just consult with affected parties on that. So it's not as if we have to leave it for another 3 years if that information comes to hand, or if you want us to start looking at that information now, we would need to talk nicely to you guys to get some extra resource in to start that process, because it will be administratively quite heavy to do that, and it would be in my team in the rate space. I suspect that there would be some extra resource needed in the regulatory space as well. Or my suggestion is we wait till see what the government bring out, but I'm open to.
So go back to the first part of your discussion was that the council are required to look at this differently from what all the systems already there, right? Yeah, 170,000.
Oh yeah, that was
7 million.
Yeah.
So where's that come? That hasn't come from us.
We currently charge on a capital value basis our ratepayers those numbers, and they are differentiated. So rural might pay less. I think urban pays 1 times, commercial pays a higher number.
So you're saying that somewhere along the line, that's not a fair representation where it's coming from.
I guess what we're looking at suggesting is that all of that gets taken away and it all gets general rate funded, because it's no different to any other service. And your differentials that we will be modelling will pick that up. The interesting thing there is you see dams and utilities, they're only paying 69,000. If we move to a capital value and that gets thrown in there, they'll pay 1/9 of the requirement. So pay 1.8 million, quick math, they'll pay they'll pay $100,000. Sorry, $200,000. What am I saying?
Yeah.
200 grand. Can't do math. As opposed to 69, which means.
So, and then you go to the bed tax. So the bed tax, for argument's sake, you're saying you're going to need that information from the government. So how do you tax it at our level? How does it get taxed?
Well, it depends.
We don't-
Who's doing that? Yeah.
So, but yet on your capital value, the hotel, the motel and the places like us will pay a tourism levy, are paying for it 3 times.
But what I would suggest is.
Rates, you pay tourism rate and now you're going to
Yeah,
have to
wait, hang on. If the government levy a bed tax, the government will be collecting that money and they will be distributing it for whatever purposes they want to distribute it, I guess. We would then have a look at that, because there's no rules around this right now. We would have a look at this and say, right, well, the government are going to pay for this amount. We don't need to levy our rates to the same extent. Or if the government say we're going to levy a bed tax and it's going to pay for public amenities, toilets, whatever, we can say, well, we were going to increase our input into those anyway. We don't need to do that now. So we would have those discussions at the time of the government mooting what that's going to look like. We don't know what that looks like yet. I think from our perspective, we do not have any information to tell you who are providing short-term accommodation.
How do you find that out and how do you get the information?
That's where we would need, and I think it's
a whole process, and we go through resource consent and then going through, because some people haven't even put it on, they're doing it now.
Yeah.
So it would be a pretty labour intensive for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Airbnb, there's people who be full of Airbnb, will they pay any tax out or rates on their Airbnb, haven't got consent.
The only, in terms of the money they're making, they won't. I guess from our perspective, I think it will be between $250,000 and $300,000 extra cost for us right now to get the people that we would need to start the process, and that we would not be able to guarantee you that we would have all of the information to be able to consult with the relevant parties by June, July this year.
We're happy that getting the guts of this right first is the priority, and that can come around recognising the government are also looking at it.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will. Wayne will send them out. Yeah, thanks.
Cool, thank you.
Look through or?
Take a quick 2 minutes to refresh your coffee, and then we will have Julie and Richard. This better be good.
Yes.
So that we can continue to be relatively on time. Going to be a great session. Welcome to Julie Scott and Richard Thomas from the Queenstown Lakes Affordable Housing, Community Housing Trust. You are now, aren't you?
Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust is us.
Yeah. We are thrilled to have you here, and some material had been sent out earlier in the week, kind of how the trust evolved and how you got to this point. So yeah, we're pleased to hear from you.
Well, thank you. So yeah, I'm Julie and this is our chair, Richard. He's been with us for probably about I've been with the trust probably about nearly 19 years. So lots of knowledge here, and we're really keen to share it all with you. So yeah, just very quick background on us. As I said, we've been going for 19 years. We have a board of trustees who are independent. Obviously, we are an independent organisation from council, but we do have a very close relationship. So we have 7 trustees, but then we have 2 councillors who act as liaisons to our trust. So they come along to board meetings. They don't have voting rights, but they just participate, and it's about that joint partnership that we have together. We've got a small team, actually getting quite big now. We've gone from about 3 FTE 3 years ago to 8.5 now. So we're getting slowly bigger and bigger. Decent amount of net assets. You can see there 84 million of net assets. I think it's about 130 million of gross assets. So we're building that up over the years. To date, as at the 31st of March, we've helped 392 households. We've currently got 242 in our portfolio, and we've got close to 1,600 households on our waiting list. So pretty big demand, and that's obviously just the Queenstown Lakes, so right through to officially Makarora, but probably more like Hawea through to Kingston, Glenorchy, and everywhere in between, Nugget. We do work really closely with council. We've got the shared goal together of 1,000 homes by 2038. QLDC has very limited housing portfolio compared to yourselves. So they have had 9 pensioner cottages over the years. I've transferred 5 of those to us and in the process of putting another 4, the last 4, into our management. So again, just sort of reiterates that close relationship we have with still being independent. I guess one of the reasons that we're here today is to talk about our programs and how potentially we could work within the CODC area. So part of that is thinking about the housing continuum and what we offer. And we do like to talk about the housing continuum in the sector. And if you think about that, down one end you have homelessness or houselessness, and then up the other end you obviously have the free market, and in between you have all types of programs from social housing through to affordable rentals, rent by assisted ownership, and then free market renting. And our goal is to kind of move people along the continuum, and we do that through the programs that we offer, be it subsidies, through rentals or discounted with the assisted ownership model. And that's also the wraparound support services. That's a big part of what we do as well. So giving people the skills and help to get them into a better position. So I sort of thought, well, what would be appropriate for Central Otago and what you guys are looking at? And one is obviously social housing. I think you're already in that space in terms of your 100-odd portfolio for your Z pensioners, quality pensioner portfolio. Yeah, so I think that's a really good one. You know, obviously at the moment you probably run that something like most councils around the country at a loss, and it's absorbed. But throughout Christchurch, Wellington, they've created their own community housing trust, and they've transferred their portfolios across to their new community housing trust so they can tap into central government funding. And that's what we do as well. So we currently have about 25% of our portfolio is social housing. So we contract to the government. We take people off the social housing, New Zealand social housing register. We put them into our homes. The government sets their rent at 25% of their income, which if you're on the pension is around $125 a week.
and then the government tops us up to full market rent. So it's a win-win for us in the household. We get full market rent, the household pays what they can afford, and the government is carrying the subsidy rather than the local trust or council. KO in Queenstown Lakes has 13 social housing properties across its entire portfolio. So I do like to boast to people that we do 4 times as much social housing as Kaingaora, which is quite an unusual stat in the country. I think from memory, Central Otago might have around the same, 13, 15.
I don't think it's even that anymore.
It's less than
Yeah.
0.
They, unless they've sold them down, they definitely used to have a handful in Roxburgh, Alex and Cromwell, not many though. And then affordable rentals is another good one. So this is actually the back of a development we built in Arrowtown probably about 10 years ago now, Suffolk Street, on land gifted to us from council. And because we got the land for free, we obviously then were able to build them, and we were able to offer subsidised rents because we haven't had to pay for the land components. So, and we have an agreement with council saying that they will be retained in affordable rental in perpetuity. And we actually set aside 2 for senior housing as well.
We have been living in our new home now for just over a year. It has changed our lives. It's amazing to find that security. We love our home. It's ours. I think that's the best thing. We have a beautiful garden. The kids are fenced. For a young family, that's really, really awesome.
So that's obviously referring to our secure home program. So that's our assisted ownership model we launched about 6 years ago. Just recently, I think I sent you the executive summary of Benji Patterson did the social return on investment report, and that was specifically on this program, showing that it's a $3.90 social return, which is we're pretty happy with that actually. It just really reiterates what we've known for a long time, but getting that independent validation is great. Yeah, slides have gone. I just missed a whole heap of slides. I'll just back up. I've gone somewhere. The key points to the secure home program is that the household buys basically the improvements itself, and we own the land. And typically a household is paying us around $100 a week in ground rent on the land. But by separating the land from the improvements is where you really get that discount for the households to make it affordable. I think it's a really good stepping stone for home ownership, but particularly in our district where our average house price is now 1.8 million. We know that a lot of people will never be able to make that final leap into the independent market. So they have a 100-year ground rent, a 100-year land lease, and that gives them that security of tenure and also the affordability. In theory, they could pay off their own mortgage because say they bought a house from us that costs $400,000 to build, they get a mortgage and deposit together for $400K, and over time they pay off their own mortgage. They could actually continue to live in that property until their dying days and just pay us ground rent. Obviously, if they had the ability to get into the free market, then we would be encouraging them to do that. But it's just that security of them being able to stay there. It's definitely better than renting, both financially and also in terms of security, being able to put down roots, which is so important to people. We have a little catch cry because we do like to say that it's a nest, not a nest egg, because people will push back at us from time to time and say, well, these households aren't getting any capital gains, and how's that fair? And we say, look, that's not the purpose of what we've been set up to do. Our purpose is to give people affordability and security of tenure, but not necessarily set them up for their retirement life. And I think that's really critical. So I'll sort of talk about some key learnings. Obviously, we are continuously striving towards energy efficiency and sustainability. So we put in an extra couple million of capital into our Tiwa Banks project for ground source heating. So I don't know if anyone knows much about that, but it's pretty smart. It's sending pipes 100 metres down into the ground, and instead of your air for your heat pump system having to extract from outside where it's -5, it's actually getting it from the earth where it's 10 degrees. So it's not having to bring it up, the temperature up so far. So things like that. Collaboration in the sector is really key. That means sharing, IP, sharing our learning, sector knowledge, even this type of stuff here, policies. There's 95 community housing providers across the country. So we are a very, very collaborative sector, which is nice. Partnering with local social services agencies is really important, and that's part of that wraparound support services that I talked about earlier. So, it might be sending people to budget advice, or working with them in the Salvation Army, whatever it looks like for different people, but making sure that we're doing that is critical. Non-market funding and financing tools are essential. And I think this relates to central government. At the moment, we've got a bit of a dry spell going on with central government funding. I think like most sort of not-for-profits, or a lot of not-for-profits around the country, but certainly under the last government, we secured 31 million of interest-free loans, 5 million of non-repayable grant, and a few more contracts that were quite beneficial. So they will come back round in time, and they are available to community housing providers rather than council controlled entities, which is something that you guys probably want to think about. Feel free to ask questions as I go. Obviously, I can talk. What else have we got? Our relationships with government is critical, and particularly for us, it's around the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. So HUD, that relationship there is critical. And we've been working with HUD in different formats. So, I think when I first started, they were called, I can't even remember what they were called, and they were under MB, and then it was the social housing unit, and then I think at one stage it was all run under Kāinga Ora or Housing New Zealand. So it's a continuous evolution on their side, but a lot of those people within government move around but stay roughly within that same area. So it's great to be able to build those long-term relationships with them.
Julie, do you think that has been kind of critical to the success, is those long-term relationships that you've built with those key players over the 19 years? And how easy do you think it would be for either a new entity or an entity from outside of the district coming into this space compared to what you've built?
Yeah, I think it's the relationships are definitely important, but it's also the relationship of the trust in the government, not just me as a person, but the trust now we've had. We probably signed our first contract with the government in 2008, and making sure over the years that we've honoured those contracts is really critical. The one thing about the government is they are wanting to consolidate the sector. So they're continuously looking, saying, there's 95 CHIPS, community housing providers out there in New Zealand. There's one or two that are literally delivering 4 homes in their own little township. So very, very bespoke, very small, but the cost of administrating that from government is high. So they are looking for consolidation. So I think their preference would be for a new Central Otago district trust in some whatever form to be working with us rather than going it alone, because it's just a whole lot more admin from their perspective.
You'll be pleased to know then that actually our elderly persons housing is a net zero. Run a sharp operation. We're not running at a loss. It's not costing our ratepayers if anybody's listening online.
That's pretty impressive. Another learning from us over the years, and I don't know if anyone is aware of this, but we're not actually a registered charity at the moment. So we started off as a registered charity. The IRD came to us in 2009 and said, you're not helping poor enough people. You don't fit with the definition of poverty. We're removing your status. We fought it in the High Court. We lost based on the definition of poverty, which went back to 1500 Elizabethan stature, talking about the assistance of poor maidens and journeymen. So it was a little bit ridiculous. But as a result of that, the government, then Nick Smith, housing minister at the time, came in and he rewrote the 2007 tax legislation, which enabled us to have income tax exemption and donee status, which is obviously the main reason you want charitable status, right? So you don't need to be a charity per se to be a registered and somewhat successful community housing provider, but it does help at the same time, I think. So we're going through the process at the moment. We've reapplied for it and we'll see where we get to. And yeah, we've just evolved over those 19 years. So when we first started, we had a shared ownership model, and the household might buy 70% of the home, and then over time they would buy out our 30%. And whilst that's a really simple, effective model for helping people get transition into the free market, it's the optics on it from the public was, well, that house used to be a community housing trust house, but now it's not. Those people own it outright. So what's happened to it? And we would say, and we would, talk to her blue in the face, well, we took the value, the capital value of that, and we've retained it, and we've just put it into a new project. But we couldn't get around the general optics, and the developers who were giving us land through the inclusionary zoning process were saying, well, I gave this land to the trust and I thought it was going to be retained in community housing in perpetuity, but it clearly hasn't been. So about 6 years a year, 2018, we moved away from that model and we said, okay, we're going to hold the land that we received through this process or from council in perpetuity. And that's how we evolved from that shared ownership model into our leasehold model, which is a secure home. So has been some good learnings over the years.
Being in the housing trust has allowed us to plan better for our future. We've been able to plant roots into our community and grow with it and start to build our lives. We went from being renters to being homeowners in less than a month.
And we were paying more in rent than we are for our mortgage now. So that's massive, really.
Thanks to give me time to have some water. So potential options, this is me and us just throwing some ideas out there of what you guys might want to do. I'm sure you've got your own thoughts as well, but one is, you could resurrect, you've obviously got your old Central Otago Affordable Housing Trust in some form somewhere, I think. You could resurrect that and contract, you could potentially contract, that trust could contract to us to deliver the services. So it could be the front face saying, we're up and running and doing community housing, and we could be at the back door doing the work, and that using, I guess, the skills and experience that we've already got in-house to help deliver. One idea. Another one was to create an entirely new trust for CODC or COD and seek CHIP status. I just personally think there's a heck of a lot of work in that. Obtaining CHIP status, which is your community housing provider status through the government, is quite a lot of work. They don't make it easy now. When we first got it, when we first started as an organisation, there was it wasn't regulated. And then in about 2015, the government decided they wanted to regulate the sector. So it was quite easy for all of us to get CHIP status because they wanted to bring us into this regulated sector. Whereas now to try and get into it, they make it a lot more difficult. So I think that's something to consider, that it would cost you a lot to do, and there's a lot of upkeep to it as well. Number 3, create a subsidiary within the Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust. So we already have a parent trust, and we currently have 3 subsidiary companies. We have a development company, property portfolio holding company, and then another company which was Shot Over Country Limited, which was ring fenced for a bigger project. So that's actually one way that could be quite feasible, is we could create a new CO DC holding company, and you could have CODC councillors, could be directors on this, alongside a couple of our own trustees, and we could run it like that. Or you could create a whole new council-controlled organisation for yourselves. Again, I think the major drawback to that would be that you wouldn't get any government funding, as I'm sure you're all aware, but it's, you know, you do need to be an independent trust to be able to capture that government funding. Or you could do nothing and you're just in the same position next year. So that was, I'm happy to take any feedback and questions on that.
Nailed that one really. So
There was
one of the things that has come around this table a few times in the past, and I'm not sure if this may be a question for you, Richard, is that this council understands that when we work together and smarter, we tend to achieve better outcomes than we could on our own. Is there the enthusiasm from your tech trust to look at what expanding your boundaries and or your offering into this region might look like, considering this council is also looking at opportunities to work with other councils as part of our government directive simplifying local government process?
Absolutely. And it's a discussion the trustees have had, and they're totally on board with it. And we've also had that preliminary discussion with QLDC. And in light of what potentially is down the pathway of regional deals, hopefully, it's crossed, it would make sense. And I think we've proved that concept across the district with the destination management plan work, stat funding stuff that we did through COVID, and stat plan COVID response stuff. DQ and Lake Wanaka Tourism have come together as one now and collaborating. There's probably no reason why you couldn't look at that whole kind of shooting box, because we are by global scale, we are kind of a small district, but we've got the same issues and challenges, and we've worked out that working collaboratively and doing it together actually makes far more efficiencies and makes far more common sense than trying to set up a whole lot of little stuff to do the same stuff, just reinventing the wheel. It's just so yes is the answer. Yeah.
It's interesting looking around this room. There's only Cheryl and I at the last community council table that ditched the affordable housing because we felt it was Queenstown Lake centric, and the conversation, the narrative that came out of Queenstown was this would be really a good idea because a lot of our workforce live in your community and work for us.
There's a lot commuting.
And that's fine. They choose to do that, and possibly they could buy a house cheaper here than they could buy one in Queenstown. So the market determines that. The part that was a big struggle for me, because I live in the outlying regions in Curtis and Roxburgh, is there's as much need for affordable housing in the rural small communities as there is in Queenstown. And who plays God? Now, I was with some relatively influential people on the weekend. They were talking exactly about this issue, and they've got businesses throughout the region. How do you make it fair and equitable as the councillors we are? We're 11 of the councillors. Does 4 representatives get 4 houses in Queenstown and Cromwell? Do there 3 affordable houses in Cranfilly and Alexandra and 1 in Hewitt? So where does that become equitable? Now, the employers that I was talking to, their argument is we can't attract staff. And I say, well, you have to pay more and you have to provide a $200,000 deposit for the house when they go and buy their house and it's attached to their work. So it becomes a private enterprise. If I want to get a worker on my farm, I've got to give them accommodation to meet the market is. In the Miniatoto, our elderly people's housing is really, really popular because they are selling their houses to the market, and then the mum and dad and 3 kids are going to there. So it's not necessarily the mum and dad and 4 kids that we need to build the houses for. It's probably the people who, Andrew's mother's a classic example, and been widowed 2 or 3 years ago looking for somewhere where they can move. And I just felt the rhetoric was starting the next person off at the ground level, and lovely, nothing wrong with that family doing what they do, but probably the market was bigger about the single unit allowing that person to move. So that's why we had a really strong discussion in the last 4 or 5 years. I know Tim Cadogan, the last mayor, was very passionate about affordable housing, but it really never got momentum. Gary Avenue come on, do we look at it at that level ourselves? I mean, I understand regional deals, and maybe it's something that might come out if they ever go ahead, if ever it stays intact, the regional deal. That was why it got parked, because it became very hard bit of work, because who was going to get it? When the narrative came from Queenstown, they're going to benefit because a lot of people go across and travel. And I tell you what, it created a bit of friction possibly that we're not a rental accommodation for Queenstown workers.
I think that's the narrative we're trying to sort of even
Yeah,
sell here. I mean, we've got housing developments right across Wanaka, Queenstown, Hardware, Cardrona, and small quantities or in large quantities. Some of them are of quite big scale. I mean, Tiwa Banks is 68 homes that we're doing, whereas Cardrona, I think we've got two homes. On our waiting list, we've got a lot of seniors and single occupant households, so we need a lot of one bedders. So we're looking at some options for some higher density land where we could do sort of smaller townhouses so that you can actually cater to that sort of demand. Because I hear your point, if you've got a senior elderly person who's on their own, wants to downsize, but their house is appropriate for a young family, right? If you can find somewhere to help relocate them, fantastic. But yeah, look, and none of this becomes possible without the donation of the land. And that's been done with the Housing Trust and developers coming to agreements themselves, and partly through our relationship with QLCHT donating us some land to do those developments. And that's the only way you can make it stack up when you take that land cost out. So if there's land available in pockets and small pockets around the region where you could facilitate something like that, either with developers or council ownership land, then those sorts of scenarios could be achieved.
Do we have inclusionary zoning at the moment? No. So
Neither
how
does
does
Queensland.
Neither do we.
So
Dylan might like to give an update.
So I'll give you an update. So that's in relation to regional deals and what Richard is referring to. So that is a request of the regional deals. It's essentially the primary request when it comes to affordable housing is inclusionary zoning
for both districts,
the Otago Central Lakes region. Now that doesn't mean we're going to get that, but that's our primary ask right now. And we see where that ultimately lands. Potentially, if we do get that though, we're then going to be in a situation where we know in Cromwell, just as an example, not the only example, but we've currently got about 3,500 new homes in that early phase or A phase of development. Essentially 5% of that, in theory, would come in core inclusionary zoning. So we've potentially got land coming, yes, no mechanism currently to manage it.
Inclusionary zoning can come in many ways as well. It doesn't have to come, in land. So Jack's Point was the very first developer in Queenstown to sign a deed for it. And back then in the early 2000s, they didn't want any affordable housing in this elite subdivision. And we couldn't build it with their covenants like copper spouting and cedar cladding. It wasn't going to be affordable. So we were happy to take the cash and we went and bought a piece of land in this new little subdivision called Lake Hayes Estate, which was very affordable at the time, and did our first development there. So there's so many different ways. So you could get cash from a new mine being built somewhere, and you could go and buy land in Ranfurly and you could build those homes on top. You see, there's different ways you can do it.
Question about being landlords, because that's maybe not the most great thing that we do as part of our portfolio, is operating effectively as landlord for our 98 housing units. What was the catalyst for QLDC transferring their pensioner housing, recognising it's at a different scale, to you guys, and how did you find that transition for the tenants?
Well, it took 7 years for QLDC from our very first formal proposal, and notwithstanding conversations before that, 7 years from the first proposal for the land transfer to occur late last year. So we haven't had our new households too long. We had to do a lot of communication, and we still do. There's still, because they're elderly, and they'd known council forever. They just didn't, and we bought the piece of, I think actually I've got a slide, we bought the piece of land next door to council cottages. Yeah. And we bought this 3 years ago strategically, this QLCHT site that you can see here, right next door to the count. And so our plan is to redevelop this. And so there's been a lot of concerns about, will they lose their home? Will they be kicked out? So we've been really clear, and we've got a clear agreement with council saying that every single one of these tenants will be offered an opportunity to move into these brand new homes. So it's just about communications. In terms of the driver for council, I think the fact that they've been running them at a loss for a long time, whereas we can tap into that central government funding. These 65 plus, if your only income is a pension, you will qualify for social housing with the government. And then it's just a case of the community housing provider getting them into a home and getting that contract with the government to do that. So that's a big one. Once council, you already came to view it as a transfer rather than a transfer off their balance sheet, but simply a transfer from one community owned balance sheet to another, it became a bit of a no-brainer. They're like, well, why wouldn't we? We're not making any money from them. The Housing Trust can make money from them, help towards our shared goal of 1,000 homes by 2038. And the management of them had been brought in-house council a couple of years ago into the property team, who, no disrespect to the property team, good commercial brains on them, but probably not those soft skills that you need for vulnerable tenants. So that was another big one.
And I wondered how much of your 8.5 FTE effectively is spent on that, effectively pastoral care for your tenants or your rent to buy people, your secure homes model.
Yeah, the tenancy management team is probably about a third of the team. Yeah, it's probably around three of them. It's not the biggest part of it. Our portfolio of 240 homes, about half of them are rentals and the other half are assisted ownership. So very little pastoral care required around the assisted ownership, but definitely more so as you get into that social housing space. But in return for that, the government funding. So I'll take you forward to a banks project. So this is, if you can see that's in, Tobin's Track it all above Arrowtown. That's a 3.8 hectares. Council's given us the land there. We've got 15 going into social housing or public housing. We get an operating supplement from the government on top of the full market rent. We then get an operating supplement, which is equivalent to around 90% of market rent. So there's
which is also being able to secure those government contracts is a big factor.
There's a financial incentive there to make sure that we can do the job really well.
Especially since footed homes in Arrowtown go to 3.8 million as the average cost last week.
Yeah. If you read everything you read.
Is that not going to be the problem, right? Your rent by nature will continue to rise in those high-end regions, and probably Central Otago and Queenstown and Wanaka are those. I mean, your growth in Central Otago and Queenstown Lakes has been astronomical in the value of your house. So it's only natural that the tenant will say, well, we want to catch up with a 5% return or whatever. So are you ever going to catch your tail?
Well, we're not going to charge rents that aren't affordable. Is that what you're asking? We're never going to put the rents up, and we don't need to. If we're getting the land for free to start, then we have no issue with trying to put the rents. We're not seeking.
I guess the purists will say, well, it's a market related, and the government subsidising whatever that cost is, you pick it up. Is there tension? Do you find tension? Or the person down the road who's been working all their life about paying the market rate, aren't they? Who decides who gets those deals, I guess?
There's a very clear allocation policy, and so with the ones where you're paying 25% of your rent, you have to go through the government's register first. So it's it's actually quite hard to get on that register unless you're 65 plus. So that kind of determines that. And then the other ones, we say, look, based on how long you've been on the waiting list, and also highest need for the rentals. So we will talk to Salvation Army and others and say, look, have you got any families that you want to recommend? We've got a 3-bed rental property becoming available soon. And that's how you learn to understand who's out there and who's in highest need.
Yeah, just taking that a wee bit further, you said that you've got a waiting list. And I'm presuming that's also for the secure home model.
Yep.
So how do you choose then when you're saying you know how long they've been on the waiting list, etc.? Because I remember when you came last time, you said that there was a preference given to people that were needed certain occupations, police, teachers and nurses. Now, I don't really, that doesn't sit well with me, because that is playing God. It is picking one person over another person. And so how do you manage that, and do you still do that?
Yeah, so our allocation policy for our secure home and our rent to buy program. So it's based on highest need, assuming you have the financial capacity to do it, because lots of people don't have the wherewithal financially to pull together 450,000. And then we have separately from that a key worker. So if we determine at QLCHT's discretion, it can determine whether a house be used for a key worker. So we do work closely with the schools in particular. We don't have a high need at the moment from the police. We do have some contacts with the local hospital and they'll put forward nurses for recommendation. At the moment, we're building 68 homes in Arrowtown, so we have a lot of ability to help those key workers. But for us, our community tells us that this is really, really important. And you know, we've got one big high school that's absolutely, I think I was talking to the principal the other day and he said they've got something like 8 new teachers coming in from overseas and one's not going to turn up because they've got nowhere to live. So for us as a community, we see it as really important. I think maybe it's not so critical for you, which is perhaps why you don't see it as important.
I think that's a really key point, is the social license that the trust has in Queenstown. I don't think, certainly in the last 5 years, I've never seen a negative comment or article or anything about the trust that you're not needed or that you're not wanted or that people don't like you playing God. I think, and maybe it's because you're in that slightly different spot from where we are.
Yeah.
Decades of sustained high prices.
And I guess that's one thing to be clear, that if we work together in some capacity to get community housing up and running in Cromwell, Alexandra, Central Otago, wider area, I would expect that it would be you guys setting the rules, not us. You don't have to use our eligibility criteria. You can use you set your own policies. So you would be tweaking it exactly for what you want. That's why I quite like the idea of, you know, it could be the existing trust that's somewhere and contracting to us to do the work. So you're doing everything at the front, you're setting the rules. We're just delivering the service that you need.
Going back to your school, hasn't the Education Board got a responsibility to look after some of its own and hospitals? Like I know back in the Minnetonka, they're selling the houses now to fund a turf. And it's like, that's pretty short-sighted. Not that there's probably going to have growth there, but every school and every doctor's surgery and everything else in the old days had their accommodation attached to it. So is there a role in your believe of government to make sure that that becomes a part of the idea? Because you can't.
I mean, the government, the MOE hasn't even identified a new site for a second high school, which is overwhelmingly needed. So I don't think housing for there's already, I think, perhaps even a dozen teacher housing homes out there. It's just not enough.
Is it essentially has that become a problem because of our rapid growth? I mean, if we're like everywhere else in New Zealand, we would be just chugging along at 3 or 4% growth. We're not. We're exponential. So
everywhere else in New Zealand is not chugging along at 3 or 4.
Well, I mean, 1 or 2, but I mean, I guess I mean, everyone's trying to do the right thing, right?
It's not just the growth; it's the demand, which is pushing up the cost. And you can see the historic data. Queenstown 3 or 4 years ago was sitting at about 11 times the annual household income. House price, it's now sitting at 14. Cromwell was sitting at about 4.5, 5. It's now sitting at 7.5, which is regarded as 1 above the affordability index. Alexandra has just pushed up above it now too, above the national as well. So the trend is undoubtedly it's only going to.
And $100 million won't fix it. $200 million won't fix it.
But if you don't have police, you don't have school teachers, you don't have doctors, you don't have a community. So at some point, you do have to make those hard decisions about.
But that's government settings. Like you guys are doing the best you can do. We're going to do the best we can do. But that's government settings.
But the government's failing to do it, then the community wants to step in and do something about it. And we have the tools to make a difference. And why wouldn't you?
Yeah, and I guess the question too is we've got that young school teacher sitting over the road in Queenstown and they can buy a house in Ranford for $400,000 and love it. Why aren't they moving? Obviously,
because it's a hell of a commute from Queenstown.
Well, I mean, the point is, you know, if there's no gold left in your gully, then you go to another gully, don't you? I mean, all I'm saying is the market just hell bent living? I'd love to live in Queensland forever too. But if you can't afford it, you don't. And I guess what I'm saying is TVET may love to have new school teachers or a doctor or nurses down there that aren't moving. So somewhere along the line, why are people not moving to Dunedin? Are they just coming, walking to Queenstown and want to stay in Queenstown?
So you know where the jobs are, and Ranfurly's not recruiting for 10 extra teachers.
Well, they're always are teachers. Downland's married.
Pretty sure they're not all moving to Queenstown because of our housing trust.
Come on,
Sell.
tell it.
Now, the question I have is, if council was to pursue this and look at the 98 elderly homes we have, and your ability to manage it, and there's quite a chunk of land there as well. These are older, but reasonably well maintained, but all had their upgrades. From your trust experience and all that sort of stuff, being able to utilise that equity that's locked up in them and to continue to improve that stock and add to it on the land that's around those places, that's all a potential reality.
I mean, without knowing too much about them, right? But sure.
The pensionable cottages we picked up from the council in Wanaka, I mean, they were very run down. And, you know, and so when we first looked at it, like, that makes sense to buy the piece of land next door. We can build get a better outcome for those households. And then we just had to work through it. So it's a case by case, but we've got access to funding that councils haven't by being a trust set up. That enables us to do those developments.
And in some cases, I think of Ranfurly, we have land next door. You know, so.
And obviously, you would like to think the build costs in Ranfurly and around Central are going to be slightly less than the likes of Queenstown and Wanaka. That's the other challenge we've got at the moment. Is construction costs are just.
I think that's kind of where the work that you've done in the past could benefit the work into the future, because you've got preferred suppliers, you've got plans, you've got.
Well, you can hopefully rinse and repeat some of the designs and plans and suites, go that piece of land
that fits on there.
Yeah, we have an in-house architect, and he doesn't do a lot of working drawings because it would suck up all his time, but he does a few, but he master plans everything for us, and then we now have a big portfolio of homes that we've built that we know are successful, and we can build at a minimum cost per square metre but still get maximum efficiency outcomes, and we just replicate them where we can. And we look at a site and we say, okay, well, this house that we know fit really well here, and then job done. So it is really easy. I do think that sometimes sitting around this table, it's like it almost becomes overwhelming. You know, Stu's question, well, where do you start? How do we treat, why isn't Ranfurly first off the list? Like, I just think you have to pick a small pilot and do it. And I look at Gear Ave where you've got so much land and think just carve off a little bit and start a pilot and crack. And that's certainly what we did. And then we've just built and built and built. And suddenly we've got 240 homes in our portfolio, 50 under construction, another 40 in the consenting phase, and more in our pipeline. Just have to make a start.
I think that's probably where it's come a little bit undone in the past, or maybe not gotten the traction that we thought, is that the disparity was not quite there for it to have that wholehearted support. Like, we're not sitting at 11 times the household income to buy a house here. But in some places in our community, we are. And if you're in an area where actually it's under the national average, it's difficult to get traction there and say that some people should be, supported into a home, even if it's not coming at a cost to the ratepayer. But certainly in some parts of our district, that's not the case anymore. People are seeing that there is a real need.
And you could have a really clear criteria, back to your point around, it was actually yours, Stu, around making sure that you're building homes that are for local Central Otago people rather than Queenstown Lakes. Just, you have to be working in Central Otago already. Job, easy criteria to fulfill.
It was I think you were emphasising it earlier, Tamer, as well, about the relationships that the Housing Trust has been able to develop over the years. So we as CODC have tried to have relationships with HUD before, tried initiatives with HUD before, and gotten zero, nothing, right? Because we don't have that relationship. we have a problem, we have a rapidly growing problem. Still don't have those relationships. Now it's getting better with regional deals and those conversations that are happening, but we still don't have those relationships with the officials on the ground who make the decisions, whereas the likes of these guys already do. And that's a massive step forward that we don't have.
Look, as it currently stands, and I'm not sure of our rental settings, but we're not, potentially not getting that 25%. You know, we're not getting any subsidy.
No.
You know, so our potentially, our tenants are
We're
paying
not.
more than what they would otherwise have to if it was set up in a different way.
And we're not turning our 98 entities into 120 or 150. We're not doing it. Yeah.
And a big part of that is because we don't have access to the capital unless we take it from our ask our ratepayers to pay it. And that's not something that the council's been doing in the past. But hopefully we might get something over the line with certain people in Wellington over the next little while, and then we can have this conversation again in a different manner.
The potential of the regional deal and inclusionary housing could be a game changer because, you know, it's so clear cut across the regional deal. You know, if it's a transaction, a new development that takes place in the Queenstown Lakes District, then the cash contribution from that would go to the QLCHT and vice versa in the CODC. It's just really nice to ring fence it. You know, there's also other opportunities for funding that I've just popped up here. So I don't know if you guys have a lot of market sales of general council land, selling it on the open market. Do you do?
We're doing a bit right now.
Yeah, so QLDC decided when the whole Lakeview and Lynch block side was going through probably about 10 years ago, they decided to set aside 5% net sale proceeds to our trust. So every time there's a settlement on that Lakeview process, we get a cash payout. So things like that. Community CLT as well is really, really keen to be part of the solution here. So, you know, at the moment we have a $4 million loan with CLT, which is at preferential rates that comes out of their investment arm rather than their grant arm. They've got equity that they're looking to invest. They would love to do something in Central Otago. So,
and look, to take this forward, because if the council are of a mind to, then this should really be one of the key consultation requirements within the plan, because if to move this forward, and we were talking about the 98 homes, all that sort of stuff, the transfer them across into a chip would require LTP type discussion, a community.
of course, QRDC's already done all the work, took 7 years, so you could just pick up some of the policy documents.
Go back to your point there, though, if regional deals comes out and we have a unitary authority or whatever, it doesn't need consultation. It won't be a part of a consultation, it'll be a part of a new entity.
No, but that's still
It's a few years away.
That's 3 years away, probably.
Oh, yeah, I know, but I mean, there's a lot of work to get to the same place in 6 years. You're waiting 20 years now for the work. What's the difference?
Before we wrap up, and in case there are any more questions for Richard or Julie, can I just get a sense check, not asking for decision made, but some direction? Do you want a paper brought back to you at a council meeting, detail around what this could look like moving forward, probably pension housing and things like that?
I think we probably want to see what the regional deal looks like first.
Yep.
Because
So
that's going to shape what the look of the paper coming to us would be.
Yeah.
And as an aside, with Gear Avenue, we are in negotiations with them to carve off 5% of the land, whatever that looks like. We still haven't, so that's something that's in there.
How many homes dwellings would that create on that 5% of land?
I'm still working through that, but
Yeah. 5 or 6, right?
Maybe check 100 in total. So.
Yeah.
6. Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming and joining us today. It is
Thank you.
great to have you here, especially given the fuel to get here.
Send you an invoice.
You break even level.
We'll pay 25.
Yeah. Thanks very much, guys. Safe travel home again.
The problem was down at the police station. Out of the.